Hey everyone, welcome to my review of the Corsair Carbide Air 540. Corsair has been releasing a lot of new products recently and a lot of new cases. This case is very different to anything that we've seen from Corsair so far because it's a cube case. It has two compartments and it has an interesting design. It appears to be a small case, but because the space has been so well optimized, it can certainly fit a high-end build. It has excellent radiator capacity, great airflow. It's also going to be a great case for modding because it's constructed from high quality materials and it's very easy to dismantle. The case is all black and it's constructed from steel and plastic. The overall dimensions are 415 by 332 by 458 millimeters. So starting with the front panel, on the left hand side is a large ventilated area. This is actually a removable panel which we'll take a look at later in the review. So as you can see, it's well reinforced. There's plastic reinforcing on the outside. We then have a small perforation honeycomb mesh, and you can see that the mesh is curved and shaped between the plastic reinforcing. So this is going to add strength. It also improves the aesthetics and it shows the high quality construction of this case. In the middle of the front panel is a Corsair logo. Looking at the right hand side of the front panel, the lower half is blank. Moving up, you can see the reset button, a hard drive LED, and power button. Now the power and reset buttons are high quality. This is the type of switch that only moves about a millimeter, so it is going to last a long time. We then have headphone and microphone jacks and two USB 3 ports. Now above the front panel I/O, you can see two vertical 5.25 inch bays. Looking at the top panel of the case, the right hand side is completely blank. The left hand side, just like the front panel of the case, has a large ventilated area. This is also a removable cover panel and the design is very similar to the front panel. The case has an extra large side panel window. All of your components are going to be visible from this side of the build. The side panel window is made from smoked acrylic, which can sometimes be a problem for visibility, but it's a fairly light smoke and this acrylic is also thin, so visibility and transparency is not really going to be a problem. The side panel window is flush with the side panel. It's actually fitted to the side panel and this is a nice little touch. It makes the case look more expensive and it just adds to the overall quality of the case. The rear side panel is almost completely blank except for a ventilated area in the bottom right hand corner. So this is a medium perforation honeycomb ventilation that you'll see throughout the case. And this is actually for the power supply, which you'll see shortly when we take a look at the inside of the case. Looking at the back panel, the differences in the design of this case start to become more apparent. The right hand side just looks like a normal case. We have some honeycomb ventilation on the right hand side, the expansion slots, the back I/O area. This case fits a 120mm or 140mm fan on the back panel, and you can see that a hole has been cut for the fan and a grill has been included. This design allows for more airflow. At the top here we have more honeycomb ventilation. Now on the left hand side, and this is actually the rear compartment of the case, at the bottom we have the power supply mounting area and then a large ventilated area. Looking at the insides of the side panels, this is where you'll start to see some of the little details that make this case easy to mod. You can see that the side panel window is easily removable just by bending up a number of metal tabs. A lot of shaping has gone into this acrylic window. You can see that all of the edges are beveled and curved. We also have holes for the metal tabs. It's built out, and as I've already mentioned, it's fitted and flush with the side panel itself. Now the rear side panel actually feels a little bit thin and flimsy. It is made from a thinner material. It doesn't affect the quality of the case though, and the edges have been folded, sometimes triple folded, so this does add to the strength. A thinner material is going to mean a lighter case. So as I mentioned, the ventilated sections on the front panel and top panel are removable covers. To remove the top panel cover, there's just two thumb screws at the back. Once you remove the thumb screws, all you need to do is slide the top panel towards the back of the case and it pops off. To remove the front panel cover, you first of all need to remove the top panel cover, and the front panel cover can be removed by pulling it towards the top of the case. Once you remove these two covers, it reveals the mounting options underneath, which we're going to take a look at later in the review. Just a brief look at the construction of these two cover panels. Now, if you take a look at the backs of these two panels, you'll see that it's only 4 screws to remove the mesh from each of these panels. Wherever you look in this case, it's incredibly easy to dismantle. Under the front panel cover is a dust filter. On the top panel, there's actually no dust filtering, but the way you should have your thermals set up is so that the top fans are exhausting, so they're pushing air out of the case, and that way a dust filter is not really needed. The construction of this front panel dust filter is excellent. It fits into the front panel perfectly. It's magnetic. It's also very strong and sturdy, made from thick plastic, and it has a very fine mesh. Now for a look at the inside of the case. This case fits ITX, MATX, ATX and EATX motherboards. As you can see, it has a large CPU cooler backplate cutout. This actually covers about half of an ATX motherboard, so it doesn't matter what components you are using, you're going to be able to access your backplate. Compatibility is not going to be a problem. The cable routing in this case is excellent. There's 9 cutouts in total, and the grommets are very high quality. They're made from a hard rubber, they stay in position, they flip back into position. So there's 2 cutouts at the top. There's 6 down the right hand side. There's 2 rows. The first is for ATX motherboards and smaller. The second is for EATX boards. And then there's a longer cutout across the bottom. So the placement of all of these is very good. There's plenty of them. On the bottom panel, we have 2 3.5 inch or 2.5 inch hot swap bays. And I think that these were an excellent idea to fill this space, considering that these are directly beneath the expansion slots. And they've been implemented without much extra cost to the case, because most of the construction comes from the bottom panel itself. All that's really been added is the connections at the back, which are an integrated SATA data and SATA power connection, and the drive trays, which are just the usual flexible plastic drive trays that you see in most cases. So you can see it's just the usual design. 3.5 inch drives just clip into position, and you can see the mounting holes for a 2.5 inch drive. These bays clip firmly into position. Now there is a negative that comes with constructing these bays from the bottom panel itself. As you can see, the bottom panel has been pressed and folded. There is some large holes in the bottom panel. Now these are going to be mostly sealed if you install 3.5 inch drives into these positions, and they are going to provide extra ventilation to a 3.5 inch drive. But if you don't end up using them, it does add a lot of extra mess to the bottom panel, and you do have these holes, which could mean dust and insect problems. So a small dust filter would have been nice underneath potentially, or either that, just if they constructed these out of separate panels. Also, a panel covering these bays would have been a small addition, and it would really have cleaned them up. And the other thing is, hot swap is great, but trayless hot swap is the ultimate. And I think with some small modifications, this could have been trayless, you know, stealthed underneath another panel, a false floor or something like that. So I think there's a lot of things they could have done here to improve this, but I still think it's an excellent addition and a great idea, mainly in this particular part of the case. This case has 8 expansion slots. As you can see, the slot covers are ventilated. Now, maximum graphics card length is 320mm, maximum CPU cooler height is 170mm. The case comes with 3 included 140mm fans, and these are the Corsair AF140L. I'm assuming the specifications are similar to the AF140 quiet version. The case can fit up to 6 120mm fans or 5 140mm fans. Now looking at the rear compartment of the case, and starting with the bottom panel. So this is the power supply mounting area, and the power supply mounts vertically. It needs to be mounted facing the side panel, which is ventilated. So we have 2 steel power supply mounts at the bottom of the case here. It would have been nice to see at least some thin rubber strips across the tops of these, just to prevent scratching to the power supply. We also have this power supply mount, and you see these in some cases, and I don't really think they're necessary, because the 4 screws that hold the power supply is almost always enough to hold it in position. And according to the specifications for this case, the maximum power supply length is 200mm, but this is the only thing really restricting the length of the power supply. it shouldn't really matter how long the power supply is. You can see there's plenty of room all the way to the front panel of the case here. Almost the entire front half of the bottom panel is blank, and that's because this is going to be the cable management area. This is where all of the power supply cables come out. But depending how clean you manage to get your cables, there may be some room left here, potentially even for water cooling components, maybe a pump, but if not, it could also be a position for PCBs, for fans or lighting. Now, as I've mentioned, I do like what's being done with the hot swap bays, but a big problem is that these cables are just far too long. They're around 1/2 meter long, and if you consider that where these cables come out is right at the back of the power supply, that is a lot of unnecessary excess cable mess. That also goes for the SATA data cables, which are so long, you can actually pull them up through the top of the case, just to give you an idea. And these cables would be difficult to modify, so that's going to be a big problem for some people who really want to clean up their cable management. Now looking at the front panel cables, now these cables are a better length. Most of them are almost the perfect length. The cables are almost all black, which is great to see. There is only a tiny bit of multicolored wiring visible down the ends of some of the cables. There's also a lot of cable management options back here. You can see there's a number of clips on the back of the motherboard tray, and also on the inside of the front panel there, below the front panel cables, it's completely blank except for cable management clips. So, you know, it's perfect for managing the front panel cables there. Now the 5.25 inch bay covers need to be removed from the inside, and they're not the difficult to remove covers where you have to, you know, use a screwdriver and lever them. You can see there's some nice big tabs you can easily get your fingers around, so they're easy to remove. The 5.25 inch bays are removable. There's just a number of screws. We'll take a look at that shortly. They're fairly standard. The mechanisms are standard and very easy to use. Now, the 5.25 inch bays actually block some of the important cable routing holes, possibly the ones you'll need to route your 24-pin cable through. But there's still a lot of cable routing options, even with the bays installed. You can see there's holes through the bays. There's also a gap down the back of them, approximately a 20mm gap. So, you know, you shouldn't have a problem routing cables. To remove the 5.25 inch bays, first of all you need to remove the front panel cover from the right hand side of the case. And it's just 2 screws to remove this cover, and also a number of push clips, and then it's only 4 thumb screws to remove the base. Looking at the back panel, you can see the large ventilated area that covers most of the back panel, and then at the bottom the power supply mounting area. Looking at the mid plate and the motherboard tray from around the back, you can see even more that the cable routing holes are very well placed. Cable management in this case is going to be very easy, and it's partially due to the cube dual compartment design. It's going to be really easy to have very clean cable management. Another great feature of this case is this 2.5 inch hard drive cage. And there's a number of great things about it. First of all, it's very easy to remove. It just clips in and out of position. All you need to do is push down this lever and it slides out of position. Also, you can reduce it from the default of 4 bays down to 3, 2 or 1 bay. And that's because the bays clip together. Not only that, it's a trayless hard drive cage. So drives just slide straight in and clip into position, and then you can plug straight into the back of them. So it's very convenient and easy to deal with. Now the inside of the top panel of the case is blank. Looking underneath the case, you can see the large holes in the bottom panel that I've already mentioned, and you can see how these could be a problem. The case feet are high quality. They're made from a hard plastic and a thick piece of rubber. Now moving on to a look at the water cooling options for this case. On the front panel you can fit up to a 360mm radiator, and there's also mounting holes for a 280mm radiator. On the top panel you can fit a 240 or a 280mm radiator. When it comes to radiator thickness, on the front panel you have plenty of space. You have approximately 105mm between the front panel and an ATX motherboard. So this means that you can easily fit a 60mm thick radiator on the front panel, and you can even go for something thicker, although you won't be able to fit an 80mm thick radiator like the AlphaCool Nexus Monster. On the top panel, you are going to run into restrictions with radiator thickness because you only have approximately 70 millimeters between the top panel and the motherboard. So that means the thickest motherboard you should really install on the top panel is 40 millimeters thick. But there is a way you can get around this, but this is something you need to figure out and test for yourselves. The mounting holes for a 240 millimeter radiator on the top panel are about 50 millimeters off the motherboard. So this means that you might be able to fit a 240 millimeter radiator down in front of the motherboard depending on the components you are using. So that means you can install potentially a 60 millimeter thick radiator, maybe even thicker. There is another restriction you are going to run into. If you end up running the maximum radiator capacity in this case, where the radiators meet in the top right hand corner, there is a major restriction there, and from my estimations, depending on how you configure your radiators and fans, you're probably only going to be able to fit two 30 millimeter thick radiators if you run the maximum radiator capacity in this case. Okay, it's now time for me to conclude this review. As you can see, I've completely stripped down the case now, and I've actually done this ready for painting because this case is for a client build that I have coming up soon. I'm going to give the Corsair Carbide Air 540 a 9 out of 10, and the main reason for the high score is that Corsair has done something completely different with this case, and that's something that I always like to see. It's something I often ask for, is innovation. It's not that we haven't seen a cube case before, it's just that the overall design of this case is excellent. The space has been perfectly optimized, and that's something you almost never see. You look at so many cases and there is just so much wasted space, mainly full tower cases, and when modding, one of the main things you can do with a lot of these cases is just optimize the space properly and fit more hardware. But if you look at this case, there's really no optimizing that can be done because Corsair has done such an excellent job. You can fit a high-end build into this case, a high-end water cooling system, yet it is such a small, compact, and light little case. It also has the typical Corsair quality, high-quality materials, plastics, the overall construction, the way it's assembled. It's very easy to dismantle because of this, and very easy to work with when modding. The design of this case may not be for everybody, but there's very few things about it that I can nitpick. I've mentioned a few small negatives. There's always room for improvement, but overall I am really impressed with this case. That sums up this review. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, like, and favorite if you want to see more.